This is the time for serious leadership.
It comes down to one word: change. Change, 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 change.
We got 5 days left. I didn't hear any bell. Did you guys hear a bell? This fight's not over.
Quebecers might grant us a huge gift next Monday.
With just 5 days to go in this race, party leaders are zeroing in on the issues they think matter most to voters and on the regions that could decide who voters elect. The leaders are all talking about different things in different parts of the country today. And just ahead, we've got campaign strategists here to help explain the closing arguments and whether they're making them in the right battlegrounds. It's day 32 of the election campaign, and Power and Politics starts right now. We are counting down to Election Day as just 5 days remain. So with time almost up, what are the parties focused on at this stage in the game? Well, Fred DeLorey was campaign manager for the Conservatives under Erin O'Toole, and David Herle was chief campaign strategist for the Liberals under Paul Martin. He's run a few elections here in Ontario, and he's also the host of the Herle, Burly and Curse of Politics podcast. Gentlemen, it is good to see you.
Great to be
in the stretch run of the campaign. David, let's start with you. I mean, we saw the clip pack there. It's about leadership, says Mark Carney. It's about change, says Pierre Poilievre. I'm not dead yet, says Jagmeet Singh. I mean, what do you make of Mark Carney's closing argument here that you're hearing to voters?
Well, I think that they are all on their best argument right now. Carney wins when people are thinking about what Trump and the United States are going to do to Canada, what that means for the Canadian economy, and who's the right person to deal with that. That's when Carney's advantage. When people are thinking about the 10 years of Liberal government and what they would like changed, Poilievre's in a much stronger position than that. And both the other two parties have essentially thrown themselves at the voters and said, effectively, both of them are saying Carney is going to win, and you need us to balance him off, either social policy or on Quebec policy. So I think everybody's on the argument that they need to be on right now, and it's a question of which frame holds for the most people. I mean, the Trump frame was extremely dominant at the beginning of this campaign, and that's when the Liberals and Carney had a big lead.
They got away from that a bit in the week of the debates and with Toulemont and Pearl when they're spending a lot of time in Quebec. Right?
They got away from it, but Trump has gotten away from it.
Right.
And Canadians are drifting away from it. So that intensity of emotion is dissipating a little bit, and it feels to me like the more that's happened, the more room there is for Poilievre's message.
Okay, so Fred, on that, I mean, the Yves-François Blanchet decision desk and the Jagmeet Singh decision desk have declared a Liberal government. It's a question of majority-minority. But you heard Mr. Poilievre there. I think in his prepared remarks today, he said change more than 50 times. I mean, what do you make of what he is trying to do in the final days of this?
Well, I agree with David Herle there, where it's the right message. That should be what he needs to pound right now. Given that the Liberals, for the last week and a half, kind of have stopped campaigning, it feels like they've really dropped back a bit. I know they put their platform out that on a long weekend Saturday, but there hasn't been a lot of movement from that campaign and their messaging. And the Trump thing we've gotten away from, where people aren't talking about Trump. He's not on. He doesn't lead every nightly newscast anymore. So when you do that, it gives the Conservatives the opportunity to reframe it in what was working incredibly well for them before this election even started, and that was that it's time for change. And you know, the more they're talking about, do the Liberals deserve a fourth term? I think that registers in people's minds.
So Fred, how big is the audience right now for the message of change? And I was looking at a graph of the Leger polls throughout this campaign, and it's just been static. It's almost been like it's baked in. I know there's changes in regions and in the margin, but like Ontario and the Atlantic just locked in, and 7.3 million people voted in the advance voting like 24 hours or so after the debates. What's your sense of how movable things are at this point?
I would say there's still a good chunk that is still volatile and that could move. I mean, I've seen it in the last two campaigns where Conservatives were in the lead up until Thursdays, 4 days before Election Day, and that's when the bottom fell out of our last two campaigns, where the Liberals were good at seizing that NDP vote and bringing it over to them and putting themselves over the top in those elections. So there is a volatile electorate that could still move. It's not big, but it's enough to make a difference in a number of seats potentially.
David, what do you think? I mean, there's been some change in Quebec in the last little while since the debates, but broadly in a lot of English Canada, it seems pretty locked.
Well, I think the result is locked, in that I think that having seen the stability we've seen throughout the campaign. I think it is now highly unlikely that the Liberals lose outright, that the Conservatives win a plurality of seats. I don't think that's at all likely. But a majority is very much in doubt. And certainly the Liberals think there are seats in British Columbia. That's why they're out there today, both in Vancouver and on the mainland, because of the NDP collapse. And there have been some polls that show some good Liberal numbers in British Columbia. So they're in BC, and they're going to be in Ontario for sure, because there's a lot of close races. And David, you know, at this point, you're looking for both some last-minute persuasion, but also motivation. Right? Getting people out. Like, people may not be undecided, but they may not care enough to get out and vote. And so that's a big part of this, too. To me, though, it all comes down to Quebec. Quebec is where the Liberals will or will not get a majority. And it looked like the key to their majority most of the campaign, but since the Quebec debate, there's been, I would say, substantial slippage in the Liberal vote to the Bloc Québécois, and that could cost them the majority at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's curious to see how many gains or losses that could result in at the end of it. You talked about where Mark Carney was today, and that brings me to what I want to do next. And look, if you're watching this show and you say, it looks different, it's because we're in Toronto. We're in the National Studio, and I don't know if Adrian's going to ever let me back, so I'm going to use the whole studio while we're here. I'm going to go out and play with the map that they had set up here for us. Because, David, I want to tell you, made the point that where they are, they're in British Columbia. This is how things stood at the last vote. Let's go to BC. Vancouver Island, Dave, this is what you talked about. This is where Mark Carney was today. You know, ridings like Victoria in particular, the last Liberal to hold that was David Anderson. And, you know, when I heard a fisheries minister with that accent, the last time we heard that in Newfoundland, we were still a colony. So let's just talk about this region out here. Like, what is it you saw from Mark Carney today and where he's going in British Columbia?
Well, it was all hunting. It was all new seats. And so they're clearly looking for gains, and they're looking for gains from the NDP. You know, there had been a lot of talk about how the Conservatives might take a lot of these ridings from the NDP because they were working at stealing their working class base in the days when the Liberals were dead and on the floor. But the remarkable recovery of the Liberals since Trudeau's departure and Carney's arrival has seemed to have as much impact in British Columbia as anywhere. And so those seats, which the NDP thought they were going to fight the Conservatives for, the NDP may not be in those fights. You know, at 10% province-wide, they may not be in them. So they may be Liberal-Conservative fights. So
Fred, on this, right, Vancouver Island seems to be real fertile ground for the Conservatives, right? This is, there's 7 ridings on the island, 6 of them NDP. You can see Liz May down here. She's a little speck of green. But this and these orange seats in the interior, more than, for example, in the greater Vancouver area, where it's more red-orange, that's where the Conservatives are hunting for gains. So, Fred, what do you make of this? Mark Carney was there hitting Surrey and White Rock. I think Pierre Poilievre is going to be there in the stretch run of the campaign, too.
Yeah, the northern part of Vancouver Island has always been highly competitive. We go back and forth, winning and losing those seats with the NDP. So I know there's a big effort to win a number of those seats there now, and with the NDP collapsing, will enough of those votes go to the Liberals to make them competitive in that way? I don't know. But there certainly should be, if there's any place in the country right now, if things are going the way they're going, we should see gains. It should be Vancouver Island for the Conservatives.
Right, but Fred, this is ball game. British Columbia is for the NDP, right? If they want to get official party status. I mean, they may very well hold their 1 seat in Quebec. Ontario's tough sledding, Manitoba's tough sledding. I don't know if they're going to grow in the Atlantic. It's all about these orange ridings in BC if they're going to get to that magical 12.
That's it. That's got to be, you know, their path to official party status. You need 12 to be recognized in the House of Commons, and that's a lot of seats they have there. And to, I think it was Herle who said 10 points in the province right now. That's going to be a major struggle for them.
So the only thing I would say, David, about that is, having learned a little lesson from the Ontario provincial election where the NDP significantly outperformed seat model projections that were based on the polling because their incumbents were able to hang on. Their incumbents had done a good enough job, and they were able to fight off the strategic vote threat. And so half of their caucus is in British Columbia, and those people are on their own winning those ridings right now, but they may win more of them than we think.
Right, so just on that, they also are in play in the prairies, and this is where Jagmeet Singh has been. There's little, oops, the map isn't cooperating here. Let's get in, I'm gonna get into Alberta, and we're gonna go to Edmonton, because there's little specks of orange in there, right? We've got Blake Desjardins, and we've got Heather McPherson there. That's where Jagmeet Singh was today, Fred. And then he's also going over to Manitoba because I don't know if he's going to go up north for Nikki Ashton, but he's got Leela Dance and he's Leah Gazan in Winnipeg Centre and Leela Dance in Elmwood Transcona. It's these western seats that, you know, he's fighting blue-orange battles in British Columbia, but it's blue-red, blue-orange when you get into the prairies, right? He has got a very difficult path to hold on to the 12 seats, even in these areas where they've normally been okay.
Yeah, these are traditionally seats that they win every election, some of these, and you know, in Edmonton and the Winnipeg areas. But the game has shifted drastically, and to Herle's point about the Ontario election, you know, the NDP collapsed significantly their vote, but only lost one seat and remained official opposition. But I think it's very different in the federal case right now, where Doug Ford was going to win that election. Everyone knew he was going to be premier, and it was done.
Right.
So I don't think it was the same type of voter thoughts process. I think right now people are voting, who do you want as prime minister, Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre? And Jagmeet Singh is just not in the conversation.
Okay, so Pierre Poilievre, because it's either going to be him or Mark Carney, David, depending on how this goes. He was in southwestern Ontario. In particular, he was in Hamilton East, Stony Creek. This is also an area where he had one of his big rallies. And from there, he's going off to Nova Scotia. Which tells me that he thinks he still can play some offense there. Two provinces with Conservative premiers, Nova Scotia and in Ontario, but it's Ontario that's going to be the ball game for him. They've got to bust down the doors of the 905 and places like Hamilton.
Yeah, I don't really know why they're anywhere else. I mean, if you know, I mean, they are going to get slaughtered in Atlantic Canada. The polling is extremely clear on that. That there are no gains for them there, and there are losses for them in Atlantic Canada. So I don't know why he would go back there. They are somewhere, depending on the pollster, somewhere between 7 to 15 points down in Ontario. And to be honest, they have to win Ontario. So that is a massive turnaround, and that's where I would be from now till the end if I was them, and I would be trying to shake this race up in suburban Ontario.
Right. So Fred, just as a final point, I mean, when you look at this, it's, you know, there's places for them to gain in southwestern Ontario. The problem for Poilievre is this is where the Trump question resonates the most, right? It's the most trade-exposed part of the country. You've got Windsor seats, you've got London seats, Kitchener, you've got Hamilton, but the big prize is really up here in the big red fortress, you know, all around the GTA. I mean, what does Pierre Poilievre need to do in these seats if he is going to pull this election off?
Yeah, we talked at the beginning of the show about motivation, about how the tour impacts motivation. And I think that's part of the reason you're seeing him going to places like Central Nova, which is a tough fight. Showing conservatives around the country that he still thinks he's in it and that he can win it. So it's a bit of that factor. But I understand they're going to Saskatchewan tomorrow, which we've swept the last two elections in a row. So I'm not entirely sure about that strategy.
I think that's on his way back west because he hasn't been to Saskatchewan yet.
So
it's like when Mark Carney went to PEI. It's like you don't want to leave anybody out.
Right.
You do it when you're making a cabinet, but not during a campaign. So sorry, Fred, finish your thought. I think that's why he's doing that.
Look, I agree. Battleground is Ontario. That's where the vast majority of seats are, that 905. That was always the plan and always the map to a conservative government was the 905 and lower mainland BC and northern Ontario to a lesser extent. So those are the three regions that I think they really need to press hard over the next number of days.
No, but David, this is it, right? They've got to bust into Peel. They've got to get into the Mississaugas and the Bramptons. If the Liberals hold all of those and their fortress in Toronto proper, it's going to be tough for the Conservatives to get the seats they need in Ontario to pull this off. Well,
and there is no polling evidence, I mean, that they're getting there. So I know that you were making a remark about different messages throughout the campaign, but they may need to say something new. They may need to say something new to get people's attention in Ontario, because they've been saying the same thing in various iterations for the entire campaign, and it is not working. And that's, you know, Ontario is a place where the Trump frame is holding pretty strongly.
Yeah. Well, this is what it all looks like right now. Monday night, we're going to start getting the results and filling in with some more updated colors as we'll see whose message and whose closing argument and whether it was Trump or change or save the NDP that carried the day. Right. David Herle, Fred DeLorey, always good to talk to both of you. Thanks for being here today, guys.
Great to have you.
And we will have you covered here at the CBC on election night. Next Monday, Power and Politics will bring you special pre-election coverage from Toronto starting at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Then our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, will host Canada Votes. So join us for minute-by-minute updates as polls close across the country. Coverage begins at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 3:30 Pacific, wherever you watch CBC News. Well, the party leaders were scattered across the country today making their pitch to voters. And where they're spending their final days says a lot about where this race stands. Up next, we'll head to our reporters covering each of the leaders' campaigns. And the Power Panel is standing by to give their take with just 5 days to go until Election Day. After a swing through Quebec, Liberal leader Mark Carney took his campaign today to British Columbia. Carney landed this afternoon in Victoria, where he appealed directly to BC voters. He then traveled to the mainland to make a couple of whistle stops and visit some small businesses. And tonight, Carney is scheduled to hold a rally in Surrey.
Here in British Columbia and across Canada, I'm asking you to vote with me for positive reasons, regardless of which party you voted for and supported in the past. Because this is the time for serious leadership.
Carney is promising to reduce the reliance of BC's lumber industry on the United States. The CBC's Ashley Burke is following Carney's campaign throughout the province. Ashley.
David, the Liberals leader is back here in battleground BC. His party's going after ridings like this one in Victoria. It's been an NDP stronghold for almost 20 years, but the Liberals are hoping Mark Carney's second visit here, this campaign will help turn it red. He's also targeting a series of other ridings they want to take from the NDP and Conservatives. In his pitch to BC voters, Carney took aim at the Conservatives leader, saying he's offering Canadians a fantasy of fiscal tricks and phantom growth, and said unlike Pierre Poilievre, he has experience managing economies and crises. Carney directing all of his attacks on the Conservatives, showing just how focused he is on his one main rival. Carney was also reluctant to say the word majority today, only saying he's looking for a strong mandate on Monday. David?
Okay, Ashley, thank you very much to CBC's Ashley Burke in Victoria. And that's where we're going to start with the Power Panel. Tim Powers, he's in Ottawa. He is a former strategist for Conservative parties. And here with me in Toronto, Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communication strategist and co-host of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And Rob Benzie is the Queen's Park bureau chief for the Toronto Star. It's good to see you all. I'm seeing Brad and Amanda in person all the time during this election. It's a nice change. Amanda, let's start with you on what we heard there from Mark Carney. Trump has calmed down, but that's not stopping the Liberal leader from talking about Trump and Trump-proofing the Canadian economy. This is the closing argument. This guy's still a menace, and I'm your best option.
Definitely. And I think we're going to hear this right through the weekend because this has been the message. It hasn't changed. It's carried them through the last 3.5 weeks. And certainly it is the message that has most resonated with Canadians, and it's still the message that's most important to Canadians. So you pair that with cost of living. We know that Canadians have a lot of anxiety, a lot of concerns around Trump tariffs, the trade war, and also how Canada is going to defend itself both against that and how it's going to appear on the world stage. So I think his best option and what Canadians feel he's best poised to do is be the person to take on Trump. So that's the most positive message that you're going to take into those last few days because it's also the most believable. It's the thing that Canadians are hanging their hat on.
So, Tim, Trump has, he's settled down a little bit, but as I say this, he is signing executive orders in the Oval Office with a couple of MAGA hats on the presidential desk, and one of them is about ending woke ideology in American universities. So who knows where that's going to go. But with him not taking direct aim at Canada for a while now, does that lessen the effectiveness of what Carney's putting on the table in this stretch run?
Maybe a little bit, but unless you are, having a pension fund or you have any of your retirement savings on the market, you're still seeing the Trump effect, and there are a lot of Canadians that are in that place. But that's a bit different than him threatening every day to make Canada the 51st state. But I think a lot of the angst about Trump is not going to go away because he's suddenly quiet. That doesn't mean, as Fred and David were saying in the last segment, that Poilievre shouldn't be driving change. So the fascinating thing with the change numbers you pointed out, to give you credit for once, you don't get it enough, I suppose, is that the change line is kind of flat. And Nick Nanos once told me when we used to do some work together that unless it's going up over 60, then the incumbents are probably safe. And so far it's stayed down below 60. The other weird anomaly there, which I know Mr. Poilievre is trying to get at, is Mark Carney is different than Justin Trudeau, at least in appearance and sound and voice. Yeah. So when you're arguing change and Justin Trudeau isn't there, it isn't as easy for you. So it's another encumbrance that Mr. Poilievre has to find a way through. And maybe, as David Herle suggested, they might try a different message other than repeating change 57 times as he did today when next they are campaigning.
Yeah, I mean, Brad, we have seen a pretty substantial shift in messaging sort of against Carney from Jagmeet Singh and Yves-François Blanchet, and we've seen a little bit of movement in Quebec since, we were all together in Montreal for the debate, and that the blocker may be up a little bit, and he's saying Carney's going to win, so you can vote for me, and that may be resonating, right? This could be a little bit of the challenge for the Liberals in this stretch run.
Yeah, that's true. And when Quebec, because of the size of Quebec, it is the second largest electorate in the country. When you just get a little bit of change in Quebec, it shows up, and it shows up nationally. Whereas where Mr. Singh has his strength and where he is vying for holding on to his incumbent seats, they're smaller markets. British Columbia is obviously the largest of them, but in places like Edmonton, Winnipeg, and throughout Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland, it'll take a little bit more for him to do that. But Carney's closing closing argument that we're hearing just now reminds me a little bit of 2004 with Paul Martin, you know, where he's attempting to make the whole election about, it doesn't matter what you did in the past, this is a new time, this election is consequential, this is something much bigger than maybe the 2021 or the 2019 campaigns. There'll be a challenge there. A lot of people will nod along and say, yes, this is an important election. But then, you know, we got 7.3 million already in the ballot box, a lot more coming. This will be a high voter turnout. And I think that there's a challenge there, and he's going to be in the Lower Mainland, but then he's going to leave again. And so for the NDP to hold on to those seats, driving that message that Mr. Carney looks as though he's going to win the most seats. The question is, what do you want to wake up in a month or two from now? Do you want him with a supermajority? Or do you want somebody on the progressive side, not just on the conservative side, because Mr. Poilievre will be asking for deeper tax cuts, deeper cuts to social services. You got to have that balance in the House of Commons. You got to have the NDP there to make sure that Mr. Carney doesn't forget the things you care about.
Benzie, supermajority is a phrase that has slipped into the New Democrat lexicon in the last couple of days. It's a little bit like watching the UK election from a while back. That's an interesting thing, because they're sort of trying to plant the seed of absolute inevitability for the Liberals. So please come back, you shy New Democrats. Is it going to work here in Ontario? What do you think?
Well, it won't work here in Ontario, I don't think, David. I think that if the New Democrats win 2 seats in Ontario, they'll be grateful. And I think that it could be a very tough night for Jagmeet Singh here in a province where he grew up and spent most of his youth, and he was deputy New Democratic leader at Queen's Park, a very well-regarded MPP when he was there. But this has just been, you know, what Tom Mulcair said earlier in the campaign. It's been a two-party race, unfortunately, for. And all progressives have been sort of scared into the fold, into the Liberal fold.
And it seems Ontario is just locked in.
Yeah,
and
since the first day. Since
you know,
the
like
first day,
in some of the
David.
regions of Ontario, there have been shifts, but broadly, it's high 40s to 50% for the Liberals, and it's just stayed there.
If things remain as they are right now in the polls, there will be Tory incumbents in Ontario who will lose their seats on Monday night, which is something and none of us would have said at Christmas time when we were last together talking about this stuff and what 2025 held. But you know, they have 38 seats in the province right now, or 38 Tories, I think. So if they have 20 after Monday night, if the way the polls are,
Do you think they could lose that many? Like, because my sense is like they're look. This is why we talk about Ontario so much, and I know the rest of look. I'm a Newfoundlander. I get annoyed with it too. But Ontario has 122 seats. That is Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island, Nunavut, the Northwest Territories, Yukon, British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba combined in one province, and that's why it matters so much, Benzie. Like I know it's been an uphill battle for the Conservatives, but you really think we're going to see losses on that scale?
That's what certainly Doug Ford seems to think and seems to believe, and he's just won an election in Ontario, won 80 seats with 43% of the vote. If the Liberals are at 49%, as they are in our aggregator at the Star, the Signal, then that's more than 80 seats. That's could be 90, 95 seats. So then the Tories have some concerns.
Well, I mean, Amanda, like the Liberals have, I think, 73 seats at dissolution. You know, 80 is sort of the threshold I look for them to clear if they're going to get to a majority, stacking on top of whatever they get in Quebec and the Atlantic. I mean, Carney's in British Columbia. I think he's done with Quebec, is my understanding. I think he'll hit maybe some of the big cities out west, but then it's, I think, Windsor to Oakville is where we're going to see him in the coming days. What do you think?
Yeah, well, in BC, obviously, because BC's in play and it's, you know, the lead is more narrow, so trying to shore up what they can there. And then for all the reasons we just mentioned, battleground Ontario, because it's so vote rich and it could really push them over that majority threshold. That could be the difference. Picking up some of the seats that they don't have in southwestern Ontario could be the difference between a majority and a minority. And when you're looking at like 170 seats to 172, 174, I guarantee that the Liberal Party is honing in on those ones. And so what do they do over the last few days? They will be stumping in those ridings where they know they're at play. They'll be taking their message there. They'll be talking to as many Ontarians as possible. So sorry to Newfoundland and everyone who's watching. That is likely where they'll be.
Yeah, and Brad, you know, it seems we are going to have, and we're going to talk about the Conservatives in just a second, but we're going to have a convergence of Poilievre and Carney in Ontario in the stretch run Well, Jagmeet Singh, I know he's traveling around. He's going to end up in the Lower Mainland in the final days, I think.
Well, you gotta, especially when you're in your closing argument and you've moved your resources from the air to the ground, and you're looking to hold on to as many incumbents and to see if there's any pickups that are there because of the splits. And again, these splits are they don't just hurt one party and benefit another. Voting for the Liberal Party in Nanaimo will elect a Tory. Voting for the Liberals in certain parts of the north of the Fraser in the Lower Mainland. So people have to not look at the national polls and say, I want to make sure that 6 or 8 or 10-point gap that I see between the Liberals and the Conservatives, I don't want that to happen here. That's not the way people should be looking at the polls. They should be saying, do I have a New Democrat incumbent member of Parliament that got, dental care and all the good things in the last Parliament? If they care about the voices that are going to be talking to Carney and pulling him over to the progressive side,
we're going to have a whole section on the NDP. I promise.
Then they have to give that a look.
No, I take your point on strategic voting, but like Vancouver Island.
He's doing such a good job.
No, look, Brad.
You got it. Okay, guys.
But
next round.
Tim, just we're going to transition to the Conservatives in just a second. But Brad talks about strategic voting. Vancouver Island is kind of Narnia in this election because everybody's in play in some way out there. But on the Ontario situation, just to close the loop on sort of this in Quebec for the Liberals is ball game. Do you think the Conservative position is as vulnerable as Benzie seems to suggest based on what we're seeing in the top line numbers and kind of the regional splits there?
Well, because Rob's signal is an open forum thing, and it's not like the U.S. won top secret, I have to believe him, of course, that they are. But there does seem to be a chatter that there is some vulnerability in Ontario, though equally, as I said to Rob yesterday, there are people who aren't, identified as Conservative partisans, but who may be intending to vote Conservative, and they're saying, oh, we're having conversations with people and we're not hearing anything positive about the Liberals. But I don't know if there's a whole lot of that out there, David, but there's a bit of it out there. There's a bit of skittishness about buying all the data that's there, but equally it's very hard to believe that every polling organization is off base. They're all pretty aligned at the moment, and that would suggest that, Conservatives do have to worry a little bit about Ontario. I mean, I don't buy this rumor. The rumor here in Ottawa is Mr. Poilievre's going to lose Carleton. Well, if that's happening, then that's quite significant and serious, but that's floating around again today because we are in the period of misinformation. So I think you also have to go with your gut to a certain degree and read the data accordingly.
Well, Tim, we just did come through 2 years where I had Liberal partisans telling me the polls were all wrong, because Justin Trudeau was underwater, and now, it's Conservatives who are saying it. So I guess, pick your conspiracy depending on your trend line. All right, so with just 5 days to go before Election Day, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is taking his pitch to 2 provinces. This morning, he was in Stoney Creek, a suburb of Hamilton, Ontario, announcing a plan to crack down on tent cities. It was then wheels up to Halifax, where he met with some longshoremen. And tonight, he's in the northern part of Nova Scotia to host a rally.
Let me be clear. Letting these tent cities spread is not compassion. It is chaos. And it is the direct result of Liberals' pro-drug agenda, policies that have legalized hard drugs, pumped toxic narcotics into our streets under the failed banner of safe supply, and then left the victims with no other options.
Poilievre says he would give police and judges more power to dismantle homeless encampments. The CBC's Kate McKenna is following the Poilievre campaign. Kate.
David, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is doubling down on his tough-on-crime message in these final days. He's reminding voters that violent crime has spiked over the past 10 years and saying he's the best person to crack down on it and tighten bail rules so that people accused of violent or serious crimes have a harder time getting bail. He's received endorsements from several police associations, including the Toronto Police Association. Here's what he had to say about that.
It means the world to me to have the support of our most courageous people. The police who put on a uniform and they leave in the morning kissing their kids goodbye knowing that they may not return. They do all of that so that you and I can walk our streets safely.
Poilievre has now wrapped up a swing in the Greater Toronto area. He's in Nova Scotia. It's his first time visiting that province in this election campaign. After that, he's heading back out west to Saskatoon and Nanaimo, part of a big push in these final days. David?
All right, Kate, thank you very much. That's the CBC's Kate McKenna in Hamilton, Ontario. Look, he's going to Saskatoon. Tim, I'll start with you. He's going to Saskatoon because they haven't been to Saskatchewan yet. I don't think they're worried about the furniture in the 14 of 14 ridings that they have. But going into Hamilton, going into Nova Scotia, going into Halifax, going into Central Nova, Sean Fraser's, the resurrected Sean Fraser's seat. That means they're all offense right now from the Conservatives. That's the play here, and the aggressive crackdown on what he considers to be social disorder message today.
Yeah, and certainly in Halifax, around that area, there was a big tent city. It got a ton of attention. He perhaps sees some alignment around the way Tim Houston won in Nova Scotia, but important to remember, Tim Houston and Pierre Poilievre have had a similar relationship to Doug Ford, and Pierre Poilievre, though Mr. Houston has not been as outright in suggesting Mr. Poilievre's future is about learning to adapt to the truth. The Conservatives, though, David, do want to keep some of the seats they have in Nova Scotia, and the polls have changed dramatically, as you know. 4 or 5 months ago, it looked like the Conservatives were going to get up to Harper-level victories in Atlantic Canada and in Nova Scotia. They want to keep, Chris D'Entremont, who's important to them. They want to keep Rick Perkins, though he's not in those ridings. He's close enough that he can have an impact. But I got to say this about Atlantic Canada, and this will outdo our Toronto conversation. So Ontario, you take a break for a moment. David, it is fascinating to me the Stephen Harper ad and how it's playing. And how is that going to play in parts of the country like Atlantic Canada, where they wanted to make gains, where they want to defend seats, given that while Mr. Harper, very respected Prime Minister, was not very much loved in Atlantic Canada. In Nova Scotia, for example, it was Peter MacKay who often carried the weight. So what they may be doing to hold and grow elsewhere is potentially going to cost them in Atlantic Canada, and this flyby may not make a significant difference.
Yeah, during the Danny Williams years, Tim, you'll remember you needed to do a hinterland who's who on a federal Conservative because they just couldn't survive in the political climate there. And Benzie, the culture of defeat line that, while Stephen Harper did, make amends for that, it's still remembered. But the Nova Scotia situation, being a bit like the Ontario situation, Conservative governments with no real relationship with the federal Conservative Party and no real active cooperation. It's not quite the Doug Ford situation, but Tim Houston did kind of go out of his way during the campaign to praise Mark Carney. Yeah. So there's alliances that could have been forged that were not forged.
And Tim Houston is very closely aligned with Doug Ford. He was at Queen's Park last week to talk about ending interprovincial trade barriers. Who was a big push was that? Mark Carney at the First Minister's meeting on March 21st when he said, what is it, one economy, not 13? Doug Ford loves that message. Tim Houston loves that message. Both Tim Houston and Doug Ford have just been reelected with decent majorities, and they're Conservatives. You would think that you would want to attach yourself to the machinery in Nova Scotia and in Ontario, and for reasons that I don't quite understand. Or maybe I do, and I can't get my head around.
It's a purity test and a loyalty test.
Yeah, and the federal Conservatives think of Houston and Ford as wets. They think that they are liberals because they're progressive Conservatives. Remember what they did to Jean Charest during the federal Conservative leadership in 2022? He was seen as a liberal because he'd been the Quebec Liberal premier. I mean, the Liberals in Quebec are a Federalist party. There's Tories and Liberals in that party.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the Liberals, Amanda, went out and got someone who could be a progressive Conservative, and right now he's the front runner. But, on the Ontario situation and the Nova Scotia situation, I mean, the criticism you hear from the federal Conservatives is that Doug Ford does not govern like a Conservative. Maybe, but he governs. That's the lesson maybe that should be learned from 3 straight majority governments.
He just won a decisive majority. Exactly. I mean, I think, when just taking the clip of Poilievre that you just played, and you understand exactly why there's a gender divide in this election, because there's a few things at play there. He's trying to appeal to women, I think, with this tough on crime safety message, but the hyperbole he uses is so absurd. So when he references the entire federal Liberal government as pro-drugs, it's just a ridiculous statement. Or when he tries to tell us that the compassionate thing to do with homeless people who are living in tent cities is to arrest them. And then he talks about the Toronto Police Association's endorsement, who I have to wonder how they were feeling about that endorsement a few hours later when they actually had to issue a media release, a correction, because he had gone just too far in his language again, saying that the police chief had told Torontonians that they should leave their keys on the steps of their doorsteps because so many cars were being stolen.
The advice was, if someone's stealing your car, don't fight them. You'll get hurt. It's only a car.
Right.
Yeah.
But he attributed those comments to the police chief. The Toronto Police Association was then forced to issue a correction release after just issuing an endorsement. He goes too far. His instinct is to go into hyperbole that I think is both offensive and also a big turnoff to women, and that's why we're seeing such a big gender gap.
Brad, what do you think of it? Because he is, change. He said it more than 50 times in his speech. Which I guess, that's your pitch, right? And then it was, the tent city crackdown, which has increasingly become, for some people it's a sign of social unfairness, for others it's a sign of social disorder, and how you define it maybe affects how you approach it as a policy challenge.
Yeah, and the question is, I think that their internal polls are showing that crime works, but the question becomes, on whom? So the Conservatives have had a struggle to get the older demographic, particularly the males. That's why we see the golf TV ad.
Big Cialis ad vibe. You know what I mean?
I'm not going to call it that. I'll just call it the golf ad. But they're going hard on crime because they see that it may work. It's fascinating what's happening over the last couple of cycles. We saw this in the provincial elections out in Western Canada, where younger people are leaning to the Conservative movement, whereas the older people are moving to the center-left alternative. They voted for David Eby overwhelmingly. That was the first time New Democrats had that cohort. It was lovely, but we also lost the 18 to 24 cohort. They went to Mr. Rustad and the Conservative Party. So it's very interesting that he's going out on crime. The question becomes, is it enough for him to get above the ceiling? Right now, he's in the high 30s, right? He's got 30. He's got the Stephen Harper coalition back together. But everyone who thinks that crime is a ballot question is already in the Conservative column. There's no way that rhetoric is going to take an undecided voter and say, yeah, that's the message I was waiting for.
Could it be a motivation play? That's obviously part of it in the stretch run.
It could be, or it could be setting up for post-election, which is, like the Conservative Party has very powerful caucus authority on whether the leader sticks around. We know that it is one and done in that party. If you do not win the election, you are gone. Is Mr. Poilievre playing to this base not only to motivate the final stretch, but also to tee himself up to survive caucus revolt or convention revolt?
Not compromising the way Erin O'Toole is seen as compromising, because Amanda, they do lead the league in regicide, and as you were nodding along, you think that's part of the play here?
I do think it's part of the play. I think that he's trying to appeal not just to the base, but to the caucus. Brad and I actually had this conversation before we came on, so I totally agree with him. Some of the messaging right now, like, who are they talking to? Who are you shoring up in these final days with language like that? It's certainly not the women voters that you've lost. It's not the women over 55 voters that you've lost. It's not them. So who is it? If it's the base, they're already voting for you. It feels like a play for the what's next, especially if they head into a majority situation.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I was going to say, look, I've been asked this question about 4 times today in different conversations. What happens to Mr. Poilievre if the Conservatives don't win the election? So it's happening. Conservatives are having the conversation right now, and that has to be very frustrating for...
You should see Benzie nodding here next to me, because Ontario Conservatives, but I'll get to him in a second. But
Corey began the conversation, though that conversation was happening in different places, but it's picked up, and people are drawing up scenarios. Well, if Mark Carney gets a majority, he has no choice. If there's a minority, then maybe he has a play. Depends how long. But it's not helpful for the Conservatives that's happening now, and it's happening everywhere.
Okay, so Benzie, your enthusiastic nodding as a cue for me to come to you. Because, look, Conservatives love Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
it's growing it that's been the challenge. Like, he's not in these ads because he is polling below the party. He's become a ballot drag in the stretch run of this. And that's why Harper and the older golfers are the face of the paid media push. So he'll have a lot of support in caucus and a lot of support. I mean, what are you hearing here in Ontario in terms of where things stand there? Because there is a lot of friction.
There's a lot of friction, and the Cialis ad might help with their electoral dysfunction that they're having in Ottawa.
Ooh,
but I think, David, that. To Brad's point, this is secure the core what they're doing now, and I don't blame him. I think that stuff sells. That's red meat for the base, and I don't blame Mr. Poilievre for playing to
but they're doing it in regions or ridings that would suggest an offensive play. Right?
Well, they want us to say that it's an offensive play, but if they were good example. Last night in Vaughan, they had 2,500 people, a good number of people at a rally. The only problem is they had hoped to have between 5,000 and 7,000. They rented a hall that could hold that many. So.
Do you think that's because the Leafs were playing?
It could have been the Leafs,
because that would be.
It could have been the hockey game. Yeah. It could have been, but it's also when you make a big deal about your rally size and then you're not getting big rallies or as big rallies. That's not great. Like this is why I didn't understand why he was holding rallies early in the campaign. I thought his rallies were impressive. The numbers he was getting, that's fantastic. You do that in the last week.
It's got to build, though.
Yeah, you build
right?
to it. You don't start in Edmonton with 12,000 and then you end in Vaughan with 2,500. I think there's one. Isn't he has one more? I think is it Nova Scotia?
It's in Nova Scotia tonight.
Yeah. So if it's 13,000 people in Nova Scotia, then I'll look foolish and I'll be wrong.
I haven't checked the schedule like the debates commission, but I guess if the Habs are playing, they're a big Atlantic Canadian team.
Yeah.
But Brad, do you think this is where the play is now? Because Pierre Poilievre has always struck me as an attack. Pull the goalie and go is what I think is kind of the play here right now, because he's going into places like, if you look at Nova Scotia, Rick Perkins in South Shore St. Margaret's could be in a bit of trouble because there's no New Democrat there. So the ballot splits, you don't even worry about him. The Liberals may get it all, but there's a fisheries issue that may help him. But he's going into Halifax and Central Nova. Halifax, the major media play, perhaps. Yeah. I get the sense he's still attack, trying to win this thing.
Yeah, I think towards the end, and your tour shouldn't be improvised the day before. These were well planned out, hopefully, many, many days in advance, to give the ground team lots of notice so that they can have everything just right. So you plan on where you want to be growing. Maybe there's a little bit of flexibility in the last few days. We certainly had that in 2011, just to keep it fresh, and you go where you want to. But the message, especially in this time of our elections, the message is in part where you are, but it's still, the people in downtown Vancouver are still going to hear the tent messaging of Mr. Poilievre
and on social media as well, right? That's a big part of it.
Maybe it's a little bit for the ground troops. Maybe it's a little bit, I want to look at the map at the end, make sure I said hello to everybody. So there could be a lot of that at play, but the message permeates. I mean, I don't know. We had tent issues all over this country, and it's not to suggest that crime and the encampments are not a problem in this country. They are. They bedevil every striped government. They bedevil David Eby, Wab Kinew, even in Alberta and
we have some
Ontario.
in St. John's. Andrew
Absolutely. So it doesn't matter the party this is bigger. It's not a partisan issue. It's a bigger issue, and it certainly is important. The question is, does the rhetoric and does the solutions lead to ultimately bringing an end to this? Into this challenge, and the answer, I don't believe that the Conservatives do have an answer, but it makes their people feel good.
Okay, I want to just get quickly to the other leaders, and remind me, I do want to talk about what happens with the leaders after the election, depending on where things go. But after spending the long weekend campaigning in British Columbia, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh hit the hustings in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Singh started the day in Edmonton talking about his plan to tackle high rent. Now, he's expected to land in Winnipeg tonight, so Manitoba, where he'll hold a campaign event with local candidates and volunteers.
He's asking for a majority. Don't give him a majority. You have the power to stop that. Here in Edmonton, you've got the power to elect more New Democrats. Use your power, send a New Democrat to Ottawa, and we're going to resist the cuts, and we're going to fight back and defend renters. We're going to lower the price of groceries. We got your back.
Singh continues to bet the Liberals will win this election and is urging voters to hold them to a minority government. The CBC's Marina von Stackelberg is traveling with the NDP campaign. Marina.
Hey, David. The NDP is doubling down on its promise to stop the rising cost of rent. This is the pitch the New Democrats started their campaign with, and they appear to be ending on it too. It's likely because this is where the NDP differs from the other parties. The Liberals and Conservatives are focused on home buying and building more housing, but the New Democrats have promised major changes for renters. That includes bringing in a national rent control program to keep prices down and preventing big corporate landlords from buying up rental properties and jacking up the price. In this last week of the campaign, the NDP is trying to shore up support in ridings it holds right now. Here in Edmonton, all parties are fighting for seats, including the New Democrats. Polling suggests the NDP might leave this election with far fewer MPs.
How will the NDP fight for Canadians if there are fewer of you in the House of Commons?
That's not the question I hear from Canadians. People are wondering in the next 5 days, who's gonna fight for me? That's the question, right? We got 5 days left. I didn't hear any bell. Did you guys hear a bell? This fight's not over.
Another sign the NDP is playing defense. The campaign now heads back to Winnipeg, where one riding could turn into a tight orange and blue fight. The New Democrats have held the working-class suburb of Elmwood-Transcona almost consistently since the 1980s, but only won the recent by-election there last September by 4 percentage points. David?
Thank you, Marina. This is CBC's Marina von Stackelberg in Edmonton, and clearly she's going to Winnipeg, Manitoba, not Saskatchewan, like I said. Ignore the dumb host. I'm pretty sure the next leader, though, is in Quebec, because Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet continues to pit himself against Liberal leader Mark Carney, saying Carney will not stand up for Quebec. Today, Blanchet is campaigning in areas around Montreal and ridings the Bloc currently hold, but Blanchet argues he's not playing defense.
I'm playing very much offense, which is quite my nature. I want as many seats as possible, but I can assure you that there is no candidate for the Bloc Québécois outside of Quebec, that I won't be Prime Minister of Canada, so I'm working offense, but in Quebec only. And Quebecers might grant us a huge gift next Monday.
Now, the Bloc has made some gains in public opinion polls recently, but it is still on track to lose a handful of seats. The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian is traveling with Blanchet. Rafi.
David, Yves-François Blanchet is certainly not getting any presents from the pollsters. And it's not just that he keeps hitting areas held by the Bloc, it's that he's returning to the same ridings too. We're in Saint-Eustache on Montreal's North Shore. He was here weeks ago visiting a sugar shack. It's clear he's having trouble articulating the Bloc's sweet spot, though. Last night on a podcast, he suggested he would be happy with just shy of 30 MPs, though he admitted that would mean losing veteran parliamentarians he's grown fond of working with over the years. Blanchet spent much of today attacking the financial frameworks of his conservative and liberal opponents' costed platforms, while denying he's having issues with his own numbers. David?
Okay, Rafi, thank you very much. That's the CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian outside of Montreal. Brad, let's start with you on what we're hearing there from Jagmeet Singh. His third national election, still running on a lot of provincial issues, which I find interesting, because, you know, rent control is not something the federal government does. But what do you make of the fact that he's in Winnipeg, he was in Edmonton? I mean, it is a total defense play trying to hit the issues of people and working class voters, it seems, where he's trying to go, whatever the jurisdiction.
Yeah, and these are, when we take a look at why people vote for the New Democrats, why people like Mr. Singh, it's on issues like that. So he is not wrong to be on that. If he was good on certain other elements, you would hear him say that more. It's just that this seems to be where people like to hear from him on. In terms of where he's going in his tour, think of the New Democrat that wakes up on the Tuesday morning, the day after the election, versus the Wednesday before E-Day. Right now, New Democrats who are worried about cost of living, the affordability issues, whether or not they can have dental care or afford their prescription drugs, I don't think they care as much as where the leader is on a Wednesday, as long as that leads to more seats when we wake up on Tuesday morning. I don't know if anybody says, oh, you know, we blew it because we were in the wrong spot on Wednesday. He is fighting for his incumbent seats.
But he needs, exactly. He needs to motivate New Democrats in Edmonton, motivate them in Winnipeg, and retain them and get them.
And he needs to make the local case. So he'll be on CJOB. He'll be in the Winnipeg Free Press tomorrow morning. And he'll be getting that message out that here in Winnipeg Centre, that here in Elmwood-Transcona, that here in the city of Winnipeg, New Democrats stop Conservatives. and that you don't want to give Mr. Carney a supermajority. That is his closing argument. And you make it in the places where it has the greatest resonance. And places like Edmonton yesterday and in the Lower Mainland and on the island, that has a resonance, and that can be the difference maker. And that's why you do that. You wouldn't be flying around saying, oh, this is an area of non-traditional strength for the NDP, because the questions then would be, why aren't you trying to shore up what
He's not going to Red Deer, right? Like, he's
not
going
this
to,
round.
No,
not this round.
No. Yes, in his fourth election
We'll put that
campaign.
down on the list for later, although there's great people in Red Deer. And we've won the seat provincially in the past. So that's right now, this is ground. A lot of the work is on the ground. It's going door to door, and it's saying, here, if you want to stop the Conservatives, or in many cases, as we've talked with, on the Monday panel as well, there are going to be Conservatives that don't want to see Mr. Carney with a supermajority, and if they don't have a hope in their local riding, and we've done this to great effect in the city of Toronto over the years. I know in 2011, we had a lot of Conservatives voting for Jack Layton in 2011 because they wanted to stop Mr. Ignatieff, and a lot of Tories came out, and so people will vote strategically depending on where they live, and Mr. Singh is going very surgically to the places where it makes the most sense, and we can evaluate that Tuesday.
Yes, or Monday night in real time, as I'll be doing on the map. Just to let you know, Katie Simpson has sent me an email saying Trump going off on Canada right now. So we'll see what that's about and try to get that tape.
You jinxed it.
Listen, it's...
He's worried about Carney.
Trump signs executive orders.
He doesn't want him to have a supermajority either.
Yeah, okay. I got a supermajority's not a thing, by the way. It's just a majority, this sort of thing. Amanda, the Bloc Québécois argument, is similar to the NDP argument that creates space for us because we know what's going to happen. So put us there. But, there's been a little bit of, there's movement in Quebec that matters, right, in terms of seat count in a big way. It's hard to look at. I don't want cars from Canada, is what Trump is saying. But then he says nice things about Mark Carney. I have no idea what this means. We'll get the tape.
Well, I want to hear about the nice things he says.
I've spoken to Carney, and we've had nice conversations. This is it. It's Trump. We need to translate it, I think, before we can air it. But how worried are the Liberals right now about that argument from Blanchette? Because it looked like he was coming down quite a bit. The Liberals are going up quite a bit, and now maybe it's settling back into a more typical margin.
Yeah, and I would say that the Conservatives are also worried, right? Because what we've seen is the increase in the Bloc since the French language debate, really edging out the Conservatives for that second place finish.
But at the North Shore, South Shore ridings, the Liberal Bloc ones, right?
Yes, fair. And I think he's doing exactly what Singh was doing, which is there are ridings that you need to hold. It's been a long time since Singh in particular has been talking about, I'm running for prime minister, right? He hasn't been saying those words. Obviously, Blanchette has never been saying those words. But the point is that in these last few days, they're shoring up those incumbent seats. They're not trying to save the furniture. Well, Singh might be trying to save the furniture a little bit.
The patio,
I mean, for sure. But Blanchette in particular, he's trying to save seats. And when you're trying to save seats, you're in the riding, you're delivering the message, which frankly he's been doing since the beginning, about who is going to be the best people to defend the rights and the freedoms and the interests of Quebecers. That's the job that he has to do. It's actually the job that he's only had to do. I think Singh's a more interesting story for a couple of reasons. A, I really like supermajority. I think it's totally fine if everybody wants to use it.
You would endorse it, yes.
But I think that his communication is fascinating, and I think it's actually the right thing to do. If I were advising him, it's exactly what I would be saying as well. I think Brad would say the same thing. In these last few days, you're trying to convince your voters, your core, your base, that they must vote NDP to save these incumbent seats. It's the only thing that's left. It's the only thing that's mattered. But the problem is that he has to deliver that message while trying to defend his own leadership. He's having to dodge questions from media, really got aggressive today around what happens to you next. He does not want the last few days of the campaign to be dominated on the what's next for him. Is he going to vie for leader again? What happens if he doesn't win his seat? These are the questions coming from media. They've stopped at asking him questions about what it means, for the NDP to win more seats.
Well, Tim, we've seen three distinct movements, right, in the NDP pitch to voters, right? It started with pitch for prime minister, and then it was minority and balance of power, and now it's stop the supermajority and help us survive. It is a pitch for party status and re-electing as many incumbents as you can. It's not even the seats they held where they've got new candidates. It's about the New Democrats in the places they are.
Mr. Singh is the hangover from the agreement that he and Mr. Trudeau made. Nobody's had the opportunity to render a verdict on Mr. Singh. Mr. Trudeau took that off the table, so he's hanging around and he's wearing all of that. To your point about what's happening local, as we both know, one of the seats the NDP hoped to pick up was in St. John's East. Mary Shortall, great candidate there, well-known leader, well-regarded in the community. All of her radio ads that I've heard repeatedly in the last number of days are all about her background, her ability to stand up, her ability to fight. Ne'er a mention that I can recall of Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh has a bit of a Polyev challenge in as much I'm not sure a lot of his candidates in certain areas want him there. And if they're trying to win these fights on their own when they're low in the polls and the anxiety is around either Trump or affordability, boy, that puts them in a tough place. So Mr. Singh may be told, yeah, just keep going west, go past BC, don't come here. I don't know how helpful he is, not to be too disrespectful to him, to the party at this juncture in time. It's probably going to be one-on-one, high-profile candidates trying to save seats themselves while playing fairly as best they can with their leader who is not popular.
Right. So Benzie, just to get back to the NDP here in Ontario, the southwestern Ontario seats, Matthew Green, Lindsay Matheson, and Brian Massey. What do you think? I mean, Trump, we're going to play the Trump tape. 25% tariffs on cars on Canada could go up. You know?
Yeah, I mean, every time you're talking about Donald Trump, it's a good day for Mark Carney. But I think the Democrats could maybe cling to the hope that what happened in the Ontario election 2 months ago, they got 18.5% of the vote. Not even 1 million people in Ontario voted for them, but that translated into 27 seats because they had strong incumbents and people that showed up. And the Democrats are good at focusing the resources on winnable seats. The problem is they don't have a huge footprint in Ontario federally.
Well, and they're spread like from Alexander Boularice to Vancouver Island. Right?
Yeah, and they're focused on different areas at different times, in different time zones. It's just, it's a very tough, stronghold to defend, if you can call it a stronghold. I think it is a seat saver, to Amanda's point. It's all about that. I mean, the only pickup that I've heard them talk about is Ruth Ellen Brasseau, but I don't know if that's possible. Is it?
Yeah.
Brad? I don't know. I mean,
it's tough. She got into it a little bit late in the campaign.
Good candidate. She was a good MP. But
if the ballot question in Quebec is increasingly becoming, who do you want to deal with Trump? Because Mark Carney's French has passed the test for that challenge. That's why the Bloc has been getting squeezed. It's tough for the NDP to come in there. So just look, one last question. I mentioned I wanted to get back to the leadership. Assume the polling as it exists today is predictive. And we end up, I don't know if it'll be a super majority, Brad, but with a Liberal majority on April 28th.
Okay.
Does any leader other than Mark Carney survive?
No.
Says Amanda.
But I wonder about this because there is a non-zero possibility that all of the leaders who led the national parties through the national parliament in 2024 will be gone at some point in 2025 if Mark Carney wins this, because Trudeau left on the 6th of January, and now potentially everyone else stands to fall short or be diminished, and you often don't survive if that happens.
I think that at the risk of coming across like I'm not answering your question, it is
You're not going to answer my question.
It is outcome specific, because to Robert's point, like the handful of days before the Ontario election, the New Democrats in Ontario were just in distant third place. And people were saying, all my Liberal friends were saying, the NDP are going to lose party status. And, what is the future of Marit Stiles? They asked. And that was a credible question for the pundit class to ask.
Yep.
And then, of course, she won 27 seats and is the leader of the official opposition. I haven't had that question again. It's outcome specific.
Right.
So the answer to your question is, let's have this conversation. I'm coming back Tuesday, the day after. We'll have the results, and we can assess properly. Because if Polyev surprises us and does well, and his caucus loves him because he's pure.
He was up 25 points.
Or if they don't like him, it's up to the caucus, not to the Democrats.
Brad, who's picking the Pope? Are you prepared to tell us that one? Where's that going?
I have a pool going, Tim. You can be in on the conclave.
We're going to get Eric Grenier in on that and put the odds on the conclave aggregator. Marit Stiles, she wants her vote. Amanda, you think no way. If Carney wins a majority, nobody else stays around?
No.
No.
Nobody else stays around. Because you said, you didn't say this was outcome-based. You said based on the polls today.
Yes, I know.
If it turns out,
But he answered the
based
question
on
he
the
wanted
polls.
to answer,
I know
not the
he
question I
did.
asked.
He's very surgical in his communication skills. But based on the polls today, if the NDP come in with 8% or 7%.
If the trend line just keeps going
and
down.
these are the questions the media are asking him today. We haven't even got to the polls. Polyev is part of a party that is the one and done party, and we know that there is a decisive group of conservatives, you can call them Ontario conservatives, that are already gunning.
Yep.
But he walks away after not being able to deliver on a 25-point lead, losing a 25-point lead, and hands over a majority to the Liberals. He's done.
There is an argument, Tim, though, that you could make that it was kind of circumstances, right? The Trump effect changed everything, and he didn't lose his vote. The NDP and the Bloc vote went to the Liberals. Now, the counter to that is when the question is who's best to deal with Trump, why weren't you the answer? But I don't know if the caucus will ask that. I mean, what's your sense?
It sounds like what you say when the San Francisco 49ers lose all the time. Well, you know, the other team was a lot better. I would say this, David, that Pierre Poilievre can make an argument if he does lose and he gets 39% that he got what Stephen Harper got. But I think conservatives will say, and they won't be alone in saying it, you play the game you play. And, yep, Mark Carney rose, the NDP collapsed. You didn't appear, at least so far, and maybe this changes, to have a game plan to manage all of that. You had your opportunity. This is in 2004 when Stephen Harper, newly elected leader of the newly constructed Conservative Party, held Paul Martin, who was supposed to have a supermajority of the day, 200 seats, to and got a chance then. If Pierre holds Mark Carney to a minority, I think he gets a shot, but I very much doubt it if there's a majority.
Okay, and Tim, the Niners lose because the refs don't call holding on the Chiefs. Benzi, final thought from you. Then we
Yeah, I mean, I think Jagmeet Singh has gone regardless. I think that he's run what? This is his third kick.
This will be his third, yeah.
So, and you know what? He doesn't know. He's done his time. I think, and I've known him a long time. I personally like Jagmeet. He's a good guy. Personally, I'm not commenting on his politics. I'm agnostic on that stuff. But so I think he's gone. Pierre Poilievre, I think if Pierre Poilievre wins Carleton on Monday night, I think he stays on. I think if he loses his seat, it'd be very, very hard for him to stay on. I think he might try to stay on even if it's a Carney majority and he wins his seat because he has that party. But the postmortems will be really, really ugly. And David, you and I have talked about this before. Like this is a party that loves to defenestrate its leaders. I mean.
Metaphorically.
Literally and metaphorically. But I think if Erin O'Toole might have already been prime minister if they hadn't gotten rid of him in early 2022. I actually think he could have, because it would have been a safe. New Democrats could vote, could defeat the government knowing that Erin O'Toole was the Tory leader.
Well, look, they were going to win when it was a three-term, deeply unpopular underwater prime minister, and the minute it wasn't, it shifted back. And there's something that isn't working in Ontario and in the Atlantic, and that's stuff you got to figure out. Okay, we've got to defenestrate the panel because we're out of time. I want to thank Tim Powers, Amanda Alvaro, Brad Levine, who will answer my question on Tuesday, and Rob Benzi. We're going to see some of you back here on Monday for a special pre-election show because we're here for the rest of the week and through the election. But let's take a look at those comments on Canada from U.S. President Donald Trump just moments ago in the White House.
Think of this, 5,000. I was saying 2,500, and everyone was telling me that's low. 5,000 soldiers are being killed every week, approximately. Think of that. Every week, 5,000 soldiers, but let's say from 3,000 to 5,000 are being killed. They're Russian and Ukrainian. They're not Americans, but they're Russian, but they're people. And they're humans. They're human beings. They have families. They wave goodbye to their son, and then they get a call that the son's no longer there. It's a vicious war. And if I can help solve it, you know, we're not losing our soldiers, but we're losing soldiers, a lot of people. And if I can solve it because of a certain ability, that would be great. And if it doesn't happen, I will say that I think Russia is ready. And a lot of people said Russia wanted to go for the whole thing. And I think we have a deal with Russia. We have to get a deal with Zelensky, and I hope that Zelensky, I thought it might be easier to deal with Zelensky. So far it's been harder, but that's okay. It's all right. But I think we have a deal with both. I hope they do it because I'm looking to save. And, you know, we spend a lot of money, but this is
Okay, we just want to break in here. That's not the part of the Trump tape that we wanted to play right away. He's talking about a very important issue, but it's not the Canada-specific comments that we wanted to hear. We're going to just cue those up, get to those, and after that, we're going to talk to Katie Simpson about it. Gang, is the tape ready to go? Okay, all right. Well, the alerts that we have received as we're queuing up the tape is that Trump, the way go out over the wires. And we get Trump, I don't want cars from Canada. Trump, I've spoken to Carney, and we've had nice conversations. 25% on cars on Canada could go up. Says as a state, Canada works great. And Trump says they're working on a deal with Canada. So those are the bullet highlights. We've got the tape. You can have a listen now.
Do you have a prediction for that? And what do you think the results of
With respect to Canada?
With the negotiations?
Oh, I don't want to predict other nations' elections. It's tough enough doing this one. Look, I love the Canadian people. I like Canada. But it's costing us $200 billion a year to support Canada. $200 billion. And I say, why are we doing that? You know what? We can make our own cars. We have more energy than they do. We have more energy than anybody in the world. We don't need their lumber, obviously. We have more lumber. We have a lot of lumber. We have a lot of everything that they sell us. But in particular, cars, they took a large percentage of the car making, and I want to bring it back to this country. I really don't want cars from Canada. So when I put tariffs on Canada, they're paying 25%, but that could go up in terms of cars. When we put tariffs on, all we're doing is we're saying we don't want your cars in all due respect. We want really to make our own cars, which is what we're doing in record numbers now. You know, we're going to be at record levels in a very near future because of all the plants, the car plants that are being built. And I'd rather see them made in Michigan and made in South Carolina and made in different states, Tennessee. We have a lot of great car-making states, and we have some that aren't car-making yet, but they will soon be car-making states. And that's what I want to see for our country. At the same time, I want to help Canada. I have spoken to the current Prime Minister. He was very, very nice, I will say. Very nice. We had a couple of very nice conversations, very good. But I don't think it's appropriate for me to get involved in their election.
Mr. President, if I may, this deal that you have with Russia, does it include recognizing Russia's sovereignty over Crimea?
Well, everything is good. Look, I just want to see the war end. I don't care. If they're both happy, they both sign an agreement. I have no favorites. I don't want to have any favorites. I want to have a deal done. I want to save the lives. Now, with that being said, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars through Biden. Biden should have never let that war happen. We're spending hundreds of billions, maybe $350 billion we've given to Ukraine. And we could use that money right here. So I'd like to see that. But most importantly right now is when I see the pictures, the satellite pictures of the battlefield, if I can stop that because of an ability I have to do things, I want to see if I can do that.
Yeah. Mr. President, thank you. On tariffs, you just mentioned that 25% could go up on cars in terms of Canada. Does that mean that you're considering changes to the auto tariffs and auto parts?
No, we're not considering it now, but at some point it could go up, yeah, because, again, we don't really want Canada to make cars for us, to put it bluntly. We want to make our own cars, and we're now equipped to do that. They took a lot of our car business. Mexico, too, took a lot of our car business. We want to make the cars here. I'm running this country. I'm not running Canada. And that's why I asked Trudeau, who I call Governor Trudeau affectionately, but I asked him, why are we spending $200 billion to support Canada, to subsidize Canada? And he was unable to answer the question. I mean, why are we doing that? And I have to be honest, as a state, it works great. As a nation, considering the fact that most of the nation, 95% of Canada, what they do is they buy from us, and they sell to us. They sell to us. If we didn't buy their oil, and we don't need their oil. We have more oil than anyone, but we don't need their oil. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their cars. We don't need anything. So I said, why are we doing this? Why are we spending $200 billion? It doesn't make sense. If we needed something, that would be a different subject. So I'm working well with Canada. We're doing very well. We're working on a deal. We'll see what happens. But again, you know, why, representing this country, why are we spending $200 billion to support and subsidize another country? Because if they didn't have us, and if we didn't spend that money, as Trudeau told me, they would cease to exist. He said that to me. They would cease to exist, which is true, certainly as a country.
And then on tourism, there's been a
Okay,
steep drop.
that is U.S. President Donald Trump riffing on Canada, the trade relationship and the sovereignty of the country after signing executive orders on a number of issues, including ending woke ideology in universities. Listening in on that was the CBC's Katie Simpson, so she's joining us now to unpack these latest comments. Katie, it was kind of like a K-Tel album of his greatest hits of grievances about Canada. Everything from the $200 billion subsidy, which is an incorrect explanation of things, but saying very bluntly, we don't really want Canada to make cars for us. What do you make of what the president said?
Yeah, and really, at the end of the day, that is the goal of Donald Trump's trade war, right? It's taking jobs from other countries at the expense of other countries, whether they are allies or adversaries, and bringing them to the United States. And he just openly says it like that. That is why the tariffs are in place. The big headlines out of that is Trump musing about possibly increasing auto tariffs on Canada. Right now, there is a 25% auto tariff on foreign-made autos. There are carve-outs because of CUSMA, the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, the reworked NAFTA. And so CUSMA-compliant components get around that. But there's an additional 25% tariff that's expected to kick in by May 3rd on foreign-made auto parts. There had been some reporting from the Financial Times that Trump was looking at offering some relief for automakers, and he was asked if he's thinking about changes to auto tariffs, and he sort of seemed to shut that down. I've asked the White House formally if there is a change in policy coming, and if we get any sort of information, I will let you know immediately. But the other big headliner of that is Donald Trump once again brings back the 51st state rhetoric. Since the Canadian election campaign began, he's really sort of dialed back his criticism of Canada. He's talked a bit about some of the longstanding trade irritants and talking about why he's imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico, talking a bit about fentanyl. But when it comes to that argument that he's sort of, play your favorite grievances about your northern neighbor, we haven't seen a lot of that since the campaign started. But right there in that moment, Donald Trump's talking about how, Canada, works as a state when it comes to the way the trade deficit is structured. Donald Trump has repeatedly mischaracterized the trade deficit as well as the size and scope of it. It's not as big as he says it is, and he sees it as, the only reason Canada has a trade deficit with the United States is because it sells more energy into the United States and it sells the energy into the United States at a discount. Still, Donald Trump and the Trump administration has labeled a trade deficit as a negative, and that is something they want to change. They want to continue to sell more products into more countries, and that is a goal. But the other goal, we heard him say very clearly, plainly, bluntly, he wants Canadian jobs and he wants them moved to the United States. So again, it is a reminder of whoever the next prime minister is going to be, the challenge that they are dealing with in a partner in the United States right now.
Yeah, he brought back everything. Tariffs could go up. We want your cars. Canada doesn't work as a country. It would work as a state. The Governor Trudeau thing and saying Canada would cease to exist if the U.S. stopped subsidizing it. So here we are with 5 days left to go in our election. Katie, thank you for answering the bat signal when we had to break the Trump glass. We appreciate it. CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington. All right, we are going to turn back to the federal election campaign. It's day 32. The election is just days away now, and the main party leaders were campaigning across the country today, pitching their message to voters.
There is an election on Monday, and it comes down to one word: change. Change, 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 change.
You can't let Mark Carney have all the power, because when liberals have all the power, they ignore people, they forget people. So you've got the power to vote for New Democrats.
I'm asking you to vote with me for positive reasons, regardless of which party you voted for and supported in the past. Because this is the time for serious leadership.
Okay, those are the press conferences, but of course that's not the only way that the leaders are trying to reach Canadians. They're also rolling out television ads as well. So how impactful are the party's advertisements in the final stretch of this campaign? Who better to ask than Eric Blais? He is the president of Headspace Marketing, and he joins me now. Eric, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Nice to be here.
So we're going to play some of the clips of the ads in a minute, but in your view, I mean, what makes an effective political ad, and what are you looking at when you evaluate these content?
An effective political ad. I'll have to answer an effective political campaign ad, because it's a slightly different, of course, than in the commercial sector where I do most of my work, in the sense that you have this sort of, mass media, paid media, television that sets the tone that technically should be consistent for the duration of the campaign. You're setting up your value proposition, you're telling your story, and you don't really deviate from that. However, we have platforms galore now, tools to deliver very micro-targeted messaging. So what happens is that we're so data-rich and in real-time data that suddenly there's this tendency to want to adjust your message as you go. And of course, they need to do that in a campaign, particularly on the campaign trail, the daily announcements, the earned media that you guys amplify and all that. But when it comes to advertising, I'm a big believer in consistency, in continuity, and so on.
Okay, that brings me to the first ad I want to play a clip of, because this is the new Conservative ad, and it is a shift. Just have a look at this.
Well, I've led people through crises my entire career. I've worked with prime ministers from both parties to solve big problems for Canadians. And right now, we're facing the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. And we need serious leadership.
So, yeah, that is not the Conservative ad. Pivoting to Mark Carney would be quite a shift for the Conservatives.
Yeah.
The one I'm looking for in control room, let me know if you get it, is the golf ad.
Of course.
Right? It's the two. Okay, we got it. All right, we'll get to the Liberal ad in a second. Here's the Conservative ad.
Come on, do you really think that a fourth Liberal term is going to change anything?
I've been thinking the same thing.
Are we really going to give these clowns a fourth term?
Okay, are we really going to give these clowns a fourth term? But no Pierre Poilievre in
Absolutely.
that ad. What do you make of it, Eric?
It's funny you pick up on that line, the clown line, because in a way, I mean, we can discuss the production values and how quickly they must have turned this thing around, but the message that do we want another 4 years of a Liberal government is the right message. And frankly, they should have brought that much more clearly, much sooner in the campaign, and through the voice of Pierre Poilievre. Where this is somewhat off is that clearly we're targeting, 55 plus, 905 Conservatives who have decided that, they might as well vote with Carney. It's a bit late to do that. The fact, to answer your question, that Pierre Poilievre is not there, I can only imagine that he would have wished to be there, but that in the end, the voice that became so difficult to tolerate for Justin Trudeau at the very end of his time as Prime Minister, I think Pierre Poilievre, with the amount of exposure he's had over 2 years, is falling victim to that as well. I think there are a lot of Canadians who can't stand that voice anymore. And
right, well, and the mood, the strategic vote when Trudeau was there was to get rid of Trudeau. The strategic vote has shifted, right?
Mission accomplished, though. They worked 2 years to do it.
Yes, but the knight can't kill his dragon too early in the story, because then you're stuck. Look, I want to look at another Conservative ad, if I can, and this is with a former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper.
The two men running to lead us both once worked for me, and my choice, unequivocally, is Pierre Poilievre.
Okay, so how impactful is an ad? Like, it's not surprising that Stephen Harper is endorsing Pierre Poilievre, right? But bringing him back and using him to make the pitch, what do you make of that in bought media?
It's impactful in the sense that we're all talking about it, because it's bringing back a former Prime Minister. Testimonials, endorsement, those sorts of ads, we see traditionally in campaigns, man on the street, that sort of thing. In this case, of course, it's a major endorsement, and it's from someone who is, to many voters, highly credible and brings back the sort of economic stewardship that he was somewhat known for. Usually, though, these sorts of endorsements are because it's someone saying something that the leader himself or herself can't say. Otherwise, they come across as conceited. He's not really saying that much about Pierre. He's just saying he's the right guy because I've worked with, I've had those two work for me, and I vote for him. Vote for him too. So there's not an awful lot of reasons why being given here. I think that's the weakness of something like this. And of course, the buzz around this is, oh my God, he's not, the leader is no longer on air. That doesn't necessarily help your case.
That's probably a data-driven thing, though, right? If you're a ballot drag, if you're polling below your party, like you're trying to make people vote conservative. I think we're seeing
potentially, we'll get to the NDP perhaps, but they too are trying to recalibrate how much of we see of Jagmeet Singh.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second, but I want to go to the Liberals. We teased it earlier by mistake, but the Liberals have released some of their ads. The focus on Carney's experience. Just have a look at this one.
Well, I've led people through crises my entire career. I've worked with prime ministers from both parties to solve big problems for Canadians. And right now, we're facing the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. And we need serious leadership.
So Eric, I find that interesting in that I've dealt with some serious stuff before, and I've worked with conservative and liberals before. It's a nonpartisan, patriotic sort of pitch.
The great unifier. I've managed crises with all kinds of stakeholders. I mean, a criticism of this ad I've heard quite a bit is it's boring, it's flat, it could be, I mean, even though there's anthemic music and we're trying to have a bit of a build and all that. But it's the guy. Steady Eddie, boring, but you know what you're getting. And so in that sense, it's quite consistent with the narrative of this entire campaign for the Liberals. Very single-minded also. I mean, when we talk about the Conservatives trying to, you know, slogan galore, the podium card changing every day, all of the Canada strong. Very consistent, single-mindedness, which we know in advertising, whether it's political ads or selling detergent, is a requirement. He's also, in a way, echoing through this creative the extremely damaging attack ad that they did against Poilievre when they had these side-by-side clips between what Trump said and literally Poilievre saying the same thing, wokeism or whatever it was. And so that's, even though that's a positive ad that's meant to be, you know, reinforcing the proposition of the Liberals, it's almost bringing back the mini-Trump, Poilievre-sounding clips that we've heard.
Yeah, they've got a new ad on social, the Liberals do, of Trump talking about firing Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, and Poilievre talking about firing the governor of the Bank of Canada. So they keep finding those comparisons and leaning into them. Okay, you mentioned the New Democrats. So I want to look at one of the NDP ads. They've had some highbrow creative stuff with revolving doors. Let's have a look at this latest one.
Do Democrats get things done for people, like dental care? It's because of you. Because you vote NDP, we can make life better for ordinary people.
Okay, this is Jagmeet Singh right into the camera, making an appeal, reminding you that even though Mark Holland, the Liberal health minister, signed the dental deals, it wouldn't happen without the NDP. Does that punch through?
Maybe. What I think might punch through and should have punched earlier is we can make things happen in Ottawa even when we're not in power. I think it was Althea Raj who wrote a piece a long time ago in this campaign saying, when is he just going to say that they won't form the government? Let's be clear. So let's just be who we are in Ottawa and the important role that the NDP has played and can continue to play post this election. So I think that that's a change in the narrative. It may perhaps should have come earlier. Healthcare, dental care. You know, when you look at the ranking of what is keeping people up at night right now, it's not that. But is it something that they can try and own? Certainly the Ontario NDP tried to play that. I think that the bigger question for them is, should they even be on television at this point? They should be very micro-targeted to those ridings where they need to hold on to what they've got or perhaps do better in certain, you know, high potential ridings.
Your point about we can deliver even when we're not in power, Mr. Singh tried to get into that in the French language debate, in particular with Mr. Blanchet, where he said you were as useless as the monarchy, in the last minority parliament. It's sort of the contrast there with another potential balance of power party. One follow-up question I have about the Liberal ads there. David Herle, you know him, you were on his podcast not that long ago talking about the ads, and he was here off the top of the show. He has criticized the Liberal campaign, the ads, for not doing enough to drive home an emotional connection. But you've made the point that Carney's brand isn't emotion, it's steadiness, right? Like, so how do you balance that in a creative pitch?
Well, my question would be, does he need it? Why would he need this at this point? You know, in consumer marketing, you know, of course there's sometimes some emotional appeals that are required for differentiation. You know, everybody washes whiter. We're the one that makes you feel better as a head of a household, you know, those sorts of things. At this point of the campaign, is that required? Should there be a final argument, a big, you remember the Trudeau 2015 sort of rally feel and all that? Should that be done? Perhaps. But I think that it's somewhat incongruent with the brand personality of Mr. Carney. This sort of, so, I mean, it's not hopey-dopey. It's not Barack Obama hopey-dopey stuff. That's not the story here. Where I think it's going to be interesting is when we just heard Mr. Trump talk about a 51st state. Yeah, it's Wednesday. There's only so many days left. People have voted. Many people have voted. What can change in terms of the messaging going forward? They can turn them around quickly, but there's always a risk in doing that.
Yeah,
so
social stuff
it'll be very interesting to see where it goes. But to answer your question on emotion, I don't know that that's necessary for him.
Okay, well, we're going to see a lot of those unemotional ads because apparently Liberals are spending $8 million on advertising.
A lot of money.
In the final week. That's like, a fifth of your spending allowance for the whole campaign. So, Eric Blais, president of Headspace Marketing, it's really good to meet you, sir. Thanks for coming in today.
My pleasure.
All right, well, as Canadians head to the polls in just 5 days, the state of our economy remains a big issue on voters' minds. Parties are honing in on their message about why they're the best to lead Canada through economic uncertainty.
The reason our economy has no growth and has been in a per capita recession for the last 5 years is because of the policies that Mark Carney advised Justin Trudeau's Liberals to implement.
Pierre Poilievre ignores the investments we need to build the strongest economy that works for everyone.
We're going to fight hard for you. We're going to put in place in this next budget, we're going to fight for national rent control.
I'm joined now by our senior business reporter, Peter Armstrong. All right, so Peter, we're in the stretch run of this election. Whoever wins this is going to inherit an economy with some challenges.
Yes.
What are the biggest needs right now?
Look, I think growth is going to be the biggest thing, because if you factor in what's going to happen with the trade war, with the tariffs, and with all the uncertainty that comes with it, which weighs on it more heavily than merely the tariffs do, you're going to see growth just get clobbered. And so what do you do to try to find spots that can spur along growth? On the upside, I think, I get that politicians are going to parse this an inch of their lives and say all of the policies are vastly different from where we sit, looking at things really through the lens of economics. The policy proposals about how to get that growth going really aren't all that different. In a lot of ways, they're suggesting the main tactics for each of these sort of buckets they're going after in growth.
Speed up approvals, make things faster, less bureaucracy, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so I think if you look at, like, the first one, of course, is speed up approvals. Whether it's a 1-year approvals process or a 2-year approvals process under Carney versus Pierre Poilievre, the idea that they're going to create an office that can speed things along and get things done, that Pierre Poilievre is going to come up with an energy corridor, and that, in a lot of ways, that energy CEOs, the open letter from the CEOs of all the big energy companies, provided a pathway for everybody to sort of say, look, here's how we can get this done. Here's what we need. Here's what we need from a policy perspective. And I think that ended up framing a lot of the sort of policy side, the politics side of what the economic side needs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there is an alignment on, there is a need to spur things along, get more projects, get them going faster. The emphasis on fossil fuels, conventional energy, to use Mark Carney's phrase, is very heavily tilted to the conservative side, and there's more of a focus on the green side transition with the Liberals. So, I mean, with that and Trump, I mean, what are the sort of the policy things they need to do to sort of navigate all of this uncertainty and balance that?
I think the key word there is the uncertainty, and providing some kind of policy framework that can give certainty where they have that opportunity. So look at all the talk we had in the month since the month that Mark Carney had as Prime Minister was to talk about interprovincial trade and Anita on knocking down a lot of that stuff. That can make a real difference. When you look at military spending, they all agree on reaching that 2% target. Well, that's like hundreds of billions of dollars. How can we spend that in a way that can be most sort of felt throughout Canada? You've got companies that make armored vehicles that have supply chains that ripple right across and right through this whole country. 600 parts makers for one company alone. You look at, infrastructure and investment around AI. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, was giving a TED Talk in Vancouver just last week saying, he looks at the big structural obstacles to expanding out AI. The biggest one, of course, is energy. And he says, when I hear that, I think Canada. I think of hydroelectric power. So, there are opportunities, but I think if they can provide that certainty, that if you're a shipping company, here are the rule changes we're going to make that'll make it easier for you to get goods across the country. If you're an energy company, here's the rule changes we're going to make that'll make it easier for you to build out infrastructure. I wish we got more into the meat on the policy bone through this campaign, but I really hope that in that first week, we're going to get, whoever wins this, we're going to get real certainty to the business community about what steps are going to come first, what steps are going to be prioritized, and how that's going to actually play out on the ground.
It's a counterweight to the uncertainty being caused by the president, right? That
For sure.
the U.S. is going to mess everything up. We'll make sure you got what you need and you can get to where you need as quickly as possible. It's kind of the pitch from the parties.
And with as much certainty as possible. Like, not to discount all of that uncertainty. It will weigh, and so much of our business does go to the United States. But where we can open up doors and windows to make things across the country go more smoothly, I think that's going to be very welcome from Bay Street and from small and large businesses right across the country.
All right, Peter, always good to see you. It's the CBC senior business reporter, Peter Armstrong. All right, the Power Rankings panel is up next to talk about the key moments on the campaign trail as party leaders start to make their final pitches to voters.
I'm asking for your vote to stand up to Donald Trump.
Change, change, change.
We go to Ottawa to get stuff done for you.
Who has the most effective message? That discussion next. And welcome back to Power and Politics. It's time now for our daily power rankings, our look at who is up and who is down on Canada's electoral stage today. I'm joined by Stevie O'Brien, who is a former Chief of Staff to Liberal Cabinet Ministers, and Matthew Dubé, who is a former NDP MP. And here with me in Toronto is Larissa Waller, a former Director of Communications for Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Good to see you in person, Larissa. I'm in your hometown. All right, we've got 5 days left in the election campaign, and party leaders are honing their final pitches to voters. Take a listen to this.
The biggest thing in this election is who's going to stand up to President Trump.
It comes down to one word: change. Change, 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 change.
Wherever you live, if you do not want Mark Carney and the Liberals to have all the power, vote for New Democrat.
I'm working offense, but in Quebec only. And Quebecers might grant us a huge gift next Monday.
All right, Matthew, let's start with you. Yes, Yves-François Blanchet is playing offense only inside Quebec. His vote outside of Quebec has totally collapsed. But, you know, Mr. Poilievre says change, change, change. Today it was a bit of Trump, Trump, Trump. I mean, what do you make of these closing arguments we're seeing from the leaders?
Well, I think the challenge for Mr. Blanchet is that he hasn't actually delivered anything in 5 years where he theoretically could have had the balance of power. So there really is nothing substantive to point to. So it's a nice feel-good thing, but there's nothing really there. I think, obviously, for Pierre Poilievre, that's what he has to emphasize, is just change and go after those disheartened liberal voters. And you know, I suspect that the Trump moment today might be a bit of a gift for Mark Carney and the Liberals. But, you know, and for Jagmeet Singh, and from what I hear, things have improved at the doors. There's a good sense that some of the incumbents are feeling good about, because that message of sending a strong New Democrat to Ottawa and focusing on gains that can be made that way rather than focusing on things that just aren't realistic with the polls right now has been something that's effective too.
Stevie, well, what's your sense of the argument? I mean, Carney has brought it all back to focusing on the economic threat the U.S. poses and how he's the solution to that problem. He got off it for a little while last week around the debate. So what are you making of the closing pitches we're seeing?
This is a one ballot issue, as much as the other parties are trying to bring up other things. We're seeing it in the polls. This is about who do you want to lead Canada through this economic crisis and to deal with Donald Trump. And I think the polls are, so he said that at the very beginning, and it's his closing as well. And I think that that's what's on the top of everyone's mind going to the polls.
So, Larissa, how does change punch through with that concern over Trump, 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 right? And what he said today, we don't want Canada to ever make cars.
Yeah, I think it's essentially finishing Stevie's sentence, right? Who's good to deal with Donald Trump right now? But then what happens the next 5-10 years from now? And why are we in such a precarious situation with our economy today? What happened 5-10 years before today? And I think Pierre Poilievre's challenge is to link before and after with right now, and that's why he's giving the change message that the guys who got us here can't be the guys who get us out of this.
Okay, let's get to our picks. Larissa, let's start with you. You want to give some praise to campaign volunteers who in some way delivered 7.3 million voters in the advance polls. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so my up this week is for campaign volunteers, and I will throw the gratitude to all campaign volunteers in every party and every riding. My team is the blue team, and what the campaign volunteers right now are doing is making sure that everybody who said that they're going to vote for their candidate shows up and votes. And they did a great job with that at the advance polls. It's sometimes a thankless job. In Ontario especially, a lot of these people are the same people who volunteered provincially, and they're tired. And they're struggling to get more volunteers for Election Day. And I sincerely hope none of them are watching right now, because I hope they're all out knocking on doors. But it's a thankless job, and it is the job of so many thousands of people in every riding across the country, and it is such a beautiful representation of democracy that I call them normal people, but normal people who aren't involved in politics don't understand the massive lift of people that it takes to deliver. Every riding is its own campaign, right? So the amount of people that takes is really awe-inspiring, and so my up this week is for campaign volunteers.
Well, look, on that point, Matthew, Elections Canada is still looking to hire people to work. 7.3 million people in 4 days is a whole lot of people, and the infrastructure isn't permanent for elections in this country. So what are your thoughts on sort of what we're seeing there, right? The work people are putting into it, but You look at that number, 25% of the electorate voting in a 4-day early voting period. I mean, I don't know who it favors, but it shows decisiveness and motivation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before addressing that, I obviously want to echo what Larissa was saying. It's extraordinarily hard work and very often without glory for those who are behind the scenes. So definitely tip my hat to that and wholeheartedly, agree with Larissa. But in terms of Elections Canada, I mean, it's a good problem to have if that challenge is there, that there's a huge interest. I don't know about, I mean, this is just anecdotal. I don't know about you, David, or my fellow panelists here, but I'm getting a lot of folks that I know who are relatively apolitical, don't follow it as closely as folks like us do, who are very interested in what's going on one way or another, leaning all ways politically. In this election, or unsure. So there's definitely something going on. I think that's a good thing. Hopefully we keep with the trend in terms of what the final turnout will be. You know, and just this weekend, I mean, the Elections Canada, we got to tip our hat to them too, in addition to the campaign workers, because they go to extraordinary lengths that I don't think many people realize. Everyone's complaining about how long they might have waited in line, but I just think of this weekend, again, anecdotal, but shows you the kind of work that they do. You know, my brother just had his second kid on the weekend. Congratulations to them. But Elections Canada workers were going through the maternity ward at the hospital, taking people's ID, finding out which riding they lived in, and helping them vote from there in case they couldn't get out of the hospital quick enough. So there's a lot of things like that happen for people with accessibility issues and the whole like. So I think, again, it's a good problem to have, but it's a sign of a healthy democracy ultimately.
Yeah, Stevie, I'm a big believer in that Canadians take Elections Canada for granted, right? We don't have the gerrymandering issues that you have going on down in the United States, so that's not totally Elections Canada, but having a consistent, credible, non-politicized way of running elections, it just adds to the legitimacy, even when the stakes are high and the divides are pretty stark.
No, absolutely, and I'm going to echo my co-panelists as well and say that democracy wouldn't exist in Canada without an immense amount of volunteers from all parties, from all communities coming together and prioritizing this. And it takes a lot of time. And it takes time from people who are already busy with their families and with full-time jobs or with all of the other obligations. So it's incredible. And I think I just want to add, because we're talking about this, I also think the ground game matters now. The Get Out the Vote, GOTV, the volunteers now, the baton is with them. Many things have already been decided. The debates have happened, the platforms are out, ad buys have been done, a lot of things have been decided, but the strength of the ground game, the motivation of the volunteers from whatever party they're with is what's going to make the difference in a lot of key ridings and maybe decide the election.
Okay, so Stevie, what you wanted to talk about is some of those ground game people and get out the vote people and motivated voters themselves, because with Mr. Blanchet declaring Mark Carney the winner and Mr. Singh declaring Mark Carney the winner, you Liberals are probably a little bit worried that people will take them seriously.
So my down for the week is progressives counting their chickens before they hatch.
Right.
And yeah, like you said, there seems to be a concession from some of the major parties that Carney will form government, and they are trying to dampen the urge to strategically vote by telling their base, it's safe, it's okay, you can come and vote for us again, let's go in with the minority. And it's not in the bag. There are 30 plus ridings that I think are too close to call. The poll tracker, CBC poll tracker itself is showing a narrowing between the Liberals and the Conservatives. And it's too much to risk. It's too important an election to sort of count your chickens before they've hatched. And I think people need to, still do what they need to do to make sure that there's a progressive voice in Ottawa.
So, Larissa, as a Conservative on this conversation, I'm sure you would like New Democrat voters to think Mark Carney has all the chickens he needs and maybe gets the New Democrats back into the 12, 15, 18% range in a poll, because that's what Pierre Poilievre needs.
Jagmeet Singh is a wise, wonderful, capable politician. And if you were thinking of voting for Jagmeet Singh, you really should. You should feel confident in voting for Jagmeet Singh. And frankly, I think Conservatives should have been helping our NDP brothers and sisters throughout the campaign. Because the reality is, in normal times, if Conservatives are polling around 40%, that's majority territory for us. Because in normal times, the NDP is good for 15% at least, right? These aren't normal times. There are ridings down through Niagara in northern Ontario and across the country where all across the country where the NDP vote has totally collapsed. And the horse race now between the Conservatives and the Liberals is really interesting. And it's hard to predict what's going to happen. It's hard to, this GOTV strategy that every party has, that we have to make sure that all of our voters vote, is so important because we don't know who all of our voters are anymore, right? We all spent so long IDing our vote, but that was with Justin Trudeau and that was with Jagmeet Singh, both of whom are essentially not here anymore. So again, if you want to vote NDP, please go vote NDP. They have delivered a lot.
You want to say it again in French for the Bloc supporters?
Vote NDP.
Yeah. But you know, Matthew, it is interesting in terms of the not normal times thing. So, you know, we have a meeting every election where we sit down and we, at the CBC for the decision desk process, so we go through all the 343 ridings. It's like Fight Club. I can't talk about the details. But like at a high level, you get to a riding, it's like, okay, normally the Conservatives would win this by 15 points, but the NDP got 28% last time and the Liberals 24, and how does that split out? And trying to like figure out how seats go, and that's just sort of an illustrative example. It shows how strategic voting, should those messages resonate, it can really change a number of ridings in a material way.
Yeah, and for sure. But I think the problem, the disservice that Liberals do to voters when they wield this boogeyman of who will get elected rather than who you want representing you, who you want to vote for rather than against, is look at Jagmeet Singh today in Edmonton with NDP MPs. In fact, the only non-Conservative MPs at Edmonton being Heather McPherson and Blake Desjardins. Both Heather McPherson doing very well, has a good chance of holding her seat, and Blake is in a fight with Conservatives where the Liberals are eating, 13, 15, 20, depending on which tool you're using online. So rather than using an online tool, with due respect to those, to determine how you're voting, look at the fact that you had an NDP who was part of getting the beginnings of pharmacare, getting dental care. And I think that's what Jagmeet Singh is saying. He's not prejudging who's going to win the election. That was Mr. Blanchet's thing, and he has his own style. Well, Jagmeet Singh has said, and sure, he said he doesn't want to work with Pierre Poilievre. So
but he's talking about a Mark Carney supermajority, not a Mark Carney majority, a supermajority, which is the sort of thing that Rishi Sunak was saying about Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom. I mean, that tells us something, doesn't it?
Sure. I mean, what it says is that when you're faced with polling day in and day out and almost hourly, it seems, he's saying, rather than looking at, these big majorities, start thinking about who you're sending to Ottawa and having strong representation. And I think that's the closing argument, to sort of bring that full circle, if you will. And I think it's a compelling argument. And in many ridings, if you are progressive looking to not send a Conservative MP to Ottawa, but someone who has your interests at heart and shares your values, often west of Toronto, that's a New Democrat.
Okay, Matthew, let's get to yours. You're down on Preston Manning, who had a moment in the early stages of the election and kind of came back again today.
Yeah, well, just sticking with the theme of unity, I guess, if you will, and where things go from here. He had an op-ed in the Globe and Mail a couple of weeks ago, and now today he's once again discussing, this supposed Western secession movement that could be fueled by not seeing a Conservative government elected. Let's call it what it is, and I think that's really problematic. Given everything that we're facing, I think that it doesn't help lower or remove the polarization that I think has been extraordinarily toxic for our politics. You look at polling data, there's no real massive movement for separation. I mean, people have grievances, people are angry, Western alienation, maybe, yeah, sure, that's a thing. But I think to question where we go from here and to prejudge how people are going to feel about a potential new government, I think just adds more fuel to that fire at a time where that polarization is alienating people from getting involved in politics, along with a whole slew of other unintended consequences. And so my down goes to Preston Manning. I think at this point he should be playing a bit more of an elder statesman role in Canada, and I don't think that serves that what he's done here serves that purpose.
But Stevie, underpinning what Preston Manning has said, there is if Mark Carney should win, he will have geographic and generational challenges, right? Younger voters being disillusioned with the Liberals and Western provinces being frustrated, to be polite, with the Liberals. He's got to deliver on some things there, early proof points of real change from a federal Liberal government to young Canadians and Western Canadians, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I think there will be a quieting of any of these succession or geographic displeasure if the economy improves, and which is what he's promising to do. If he can steer the ship through tumultuous economic times, all boats will rise, and I think it will become a more unifying force. I also think it's kind of interesting to be talking about how divisive a Carney win would be, and then also talking about a supermajority, which to me sounds quite unifying, and the disillusion
to a Liberal it would, yeah.
And but it means there's a majority of people that think that one person should be the prime minister, and it's even we're seeing Quebec coming back into the sort of a Canadian nationalist sort of agenda. So I think it's a divisive strategy from Manning to sort of take this tact. But I totally agree. If Carney's prime minister on the 29th, he's going to have to be prime minister for all Canadians, all demographics, all geographies, and I'm confident that he will be able to.
Larissa, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I have thoughts on this one.
Yeah.
The down shouldn't be for Preston Manning. The down should be for Liberal energy policy over the last 10 years, and frankly, Mark Carney's energy policy. Because I think we're sometimes blind in Ontario and Quebec and frankly the Atlantic provinces over how personal energy policy feels if you live in Alberta or Saskatchewan or even BC.
Newfoundland and Labrador has got a big stake in offshore
Sure.
wind.
Okay, I'll give you Newfoundland, but when you have a government that has projected the idea that oil is bad and that natural resource development is bad and we should all be turning towards a greener economy, and Justin Trudeau did that in a very deliberate way that made a lot of Albertans especially feel like he doesn't care about them. And Mark Carney has come in and basically said, I agree, and by the way, I felt this way for the last 10 years, and we need to look to a greener technology, and no, we're not going to develop our natural resources. No, we're not going to build pipelines. That's a very personal feeling. Preston Manning didn't make them feel that way. And Preston Manning is representing the people that he's represented for a very long time by saying, I see you, I hear you, I feel you. And that is not his fault that they feel that way. And Mark Carney, frankly, hasn't said a single thing during this election to make them feel differently.
Okay, well, look, he did say in the French language debate when he's asked there should be more oil production, he said more to displace American sources, and he has said he would support pipeline development.
How? Without repealing Bill C-69 and without increasing the emissions cap? Like that's a pipe dream, right?
Okay, a pipeline. Okay, look, we'll leave it there. There's more to say about it, but I got 40 seconds left, and then Ian's going to take the show. So I have to say goodbye. Matthew Dubé, Stevie O'Brien, Larissa Waller, thank you all for being here. And CBC, we had you covered today. We'll have you covered on election night next Monday as Power and Politics will bring you special pre-election coverage from Toronto starting at 4 p.m. Eastern. Then our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, will host Canada Votes. So join us for minute-by-minute updates as polls close across the country. Coverage begins at 6:30 Eastern, 3:30 Pacific, wherever you watch your CBC News. I'm David Cochrane in Toronto tonight. Thank you for watching Power and Politics. Hannah Mansing tonight is next on CBC News Network.